Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Here to do another video. This time we talked about The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 film. Now we're talking about the sequel to the 1939 film, Return to Oz. And this film was released in June of 1985. So that is basically years and years later. And what happened, what transpired, that brought this film about. Well, like we mentioned, the 1939 film, a very huge success, a classic in many respects. And as we mentioned, Disney wanted the rights to the L. Frank Baum books, but they were unable to obtain it because it was sold to MGM for various reasons, because they wanted that specific guy for the Scarecrow. So they got the rights to L. Frank Baum's books, and they produced the 39 film. But in 1954, Walt Disney did obtain the rights to the story. It was up for public domain, and they got the rights. And they were going to use the Mickey Mouse Club at that time, which was a show featuring several children, with Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello, that was on TV to remake The Wizard of Oz. But unfortunately, and they were going to call it The Rainbow Road to Oz. Unfortunately, that didn't materialize. So by 1980, Walter Murch, who was a famous director, um, they asked him. He's asked by the head of Disney at the time, what what movie does he want to do? And he said, I would like to make a sequel to The Wizard of Oz. So they have this source material that they're sitting on, all of um, L. Frank Baum's books, because he didn't just make The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. He made The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. He made several books. The Marvelous Land of Oz, which is in 1904. Then Oz of Ozma, which is in 1906, that he released. He released a bunch of them. And they had the rights to all of them. So they wanted to make something of that. They didn't just want to make a remake of the 39 film. So the plans go into effect for that. And they take elements of the Marvelous Land of Oz book, the second book, and Oz of Ozma book to recreate it. And it goes over not well, because first of all, this is not a musical like the first one. This is a stone cold, like, horror type thriller fantasy film. At this time, you had Labyrinth, produced by Jim Henson. You had A Never Ending Story, the first one, based on a German fantasy album. Dark fantasy was all the rage in the mid 1980s. So this is how they were going to do it, which basically is true to the original story. The original story is of the subsequent books after The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is very dark. So that's what they were going to do. Over time, though, although Walter Murch is working on it, they pull the plug on his funding, because there in the 80s at Disney there was a change of leadership, and Disney wasn't doing so well in the mid 80s. It wasn't until 89 when Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Little Mermaid came out that the Disney Renaissance began. So at this time they weren't doing so well. So he gets his budget pulled, so his budget gets cut. So a lot of the special effects aren't as good as they would necessarily be if he hadn't gotten his budget pulled. But where does the story end up? Well, in the story, it picks up 6 months after the events of The Wizard of Oz. 6 months later, and Dorothy is back home in Kansas, and she's talking about The Wizard of Oz, and she's played by Fairuza Balk. Fairuza Balk, for many people that don't know, this was one of her first roles, but she played in American History X. She played his girlfriend, uh, Edward Norton's girlfriend, the Nazi girl. I think her name was Stephanie. I don't know what it was, but she was basically she was having sex with Edward Norton when his car was getting jacked in American History X. She also played in The Waterboy as Vicky Valancourt. But this was her first role as Dorothy. And she was about 8 or 9 years old. So it was much more truer to the age that Dorothy really was in the books than The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. But 6 months later, she's come back to Candace, and she's talking about the Wizard of Oz. She's talking about the Land of Oz. She's talking about the Scarecrow. She's talking about the Tin Woodsman. She's talking about the Cowardly Lion. And her Uncle Henry and Annie M, they're like, Dorothy, please. We know you didn't go to a special magical land. We know there's no such thing as a Wicked Witch of the West, a Yellow Brick Road, a talking scarecrow, a talking Tin Man. You're losing it. So they take her to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist, Dr. Worley, does experiments on her, electroshock therapy. And in there though, there is another girl, and the girl and her both escape, and they're in a storm. Now, the night before that, though, her chicken, Blinda the chicken, discovers a magic key. So, because there was a shooting star, and apparently Dorothy believes that in the shooting star was this magic key. So as they're escaping, she goes on a dark road, and there she ends up back in back in Oz. But now Oz is completely different, right? Everything has changed. The Yellow Brick Road is demolished. Emerald City is demolished. The Scarecrow is now the king, but he's the disposed king of Oz. Because remember, the wizard isn't there anymore. So they made the Scarecrow king. He's the disposed king of Oz. And the Tin Woodsman he's made of stone now. The Cowardly Lion is made of stone because the Gnome King, Gnome spelled Nome, King, is ruling over Oz from underground, and he has his rock fairies that have from the underground completely destroyed both the Emerald City, Munchkin Land, and the Yellow Brick Road. Everything has been destroyed and demolished. And his second is a queen called Mombi, and this queen Mombi can remove her head, and replace her head with different heads. She's really scary. Right? And she has kidnapped the Princess of Oz, Princess Ozma, right? She kidnapped her the events before the Wizard of Oz, like before the Wicked Witch of the West came to power. There was the Princess Ozma, and the Queen of the North, which is the Witch of the North, which is Mombi. Again, we talked about what happened to the Witch of the North, because Glinda was the Witch of the South. The Witch of the North, Mombi, kidnapped the Princess of Oz, Ozma, and froze her. So now it becomes Dorothy's mission to save basically the Land of Oz. And Blinda can talk. The chicken can talk because she's in Oz, right? Magical powers of Oz. She can talk. And who do they encounter? Again, just like in the original, they encounter different friends along the way. One is Jack Pumpkinhead, a pumpkin like Jack-o'-lantern type figure that was brought to life with Mambi's the powder of life. So now he's not animated anymore. He's not come to life. So Dorothy gets a hold of the powder of life and she brings him to life. Another is TikTok. TikTok is this robot like character that kind of looks like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt. He's from the books as well. He was the one who sent her the key because she's gonna need this key in order to basically um, unlock the jewels that and undo the wreckage that Mambi has caused within the land of Oz. And also the Gump. They create the Gump, which is basically like a moose, a thing with a moose head that's basically a sofa. It's like this concoction character. So they are off to see Mambi. They do battle with Mambi. Inevitably, Mambi gives Dorothy a choice be- between be, um, between which jewel to unlock, right? The green jewel, the red jewel, different jewels. And inevitably, she unlocks the green jewel, which she finds out that the green jewel is the scarecrow. The scarecrow has been turned into a green jewel. Now, and she liberates him and they defeat Mambi, they exile her, and then Oz is restored. The Tin Man is, turned from stone, and the cowardly lion is returned from stone, and Ozma who's returned to the throne. Now, who is Ozma in real life? Because they go with this. See, the Gnome King, the way that he destroyed Oz, she finds out later, and is he took control of Dorothy's ruby slippers, and he offers her the ruby slippers back in order to return home. But this time she doesn't. This time she has a greater mission, so she doesn't accept the ruby slippers. In real life, this was the only involvement that MGM Studios had with the making of this film was Disney purchasing the rights to the ruby slippers. Because again, we said the ruby slippers are a part of the movie. They weren't in the original books, they were part of the movie. So, so uh, they're in this film. And see, with the Gnome King, each and every time he turns somebody in Oz to one of the precious stones, he becomes more human. He starts off as a rock king originally, but each and every time he destroys somebody in Oz and turns them into a stone, he becomes more human. You see him becoming more flesh-like over time. But much like the original movie, this is also a dream. You know what I mean? Like, and there are people in Dorothy's real life. The girl that helped her escape from the mental institution was actually Ozma in the land of Oz, because the princess was in exile. So this is the saving of the princess motif that you see in other adventure movies. Now, one of the things that people remember, one of the parts that people remember from this film is are the Wheelers. The Wheelers are the gang, because the monkeys no longer exist, right? That was part of the Wicked Witch of the West's regime. The Wheelers now are part of the Gnome King and Mambi's regime, where um, they're tasked with chasing Dorothy, and they're like this gang on wheels, right? Like their hands and feet are made of wheels, and they're and they're going around chasing her. And Fairuza Balk is really good in this. She's really expressive. But at the end, Dorothy returns to Kansas, and her uncle and aunt inform her that Dr. Worley's office had been destroyed, and the nurse, who, again, they play roles in the original. I mean, in the Oz fantasy too, because the nurse is Mambi, and the Dr. Worley is, of course, the Gnome King. Their office has been destroyed. Now she stops talking about Oz, even though she's going back to Oz. She stops talking about it because she's learned that talking about it will get her in trouble with her family once again. So That is this film. And the initial reaction to this film was a strong dislike. People did not like it because it wasn't a musical, because it was very dark. They felt that it was scary for children, and it didn't have the whimsical feel that the original had. You know, and but on but and they didn't like a lot of the new characters either. You know what I mean? Like the new characters, the Gump, Belina, um, uh, Jack Pumpkinhead. They didn't really like those either, and they felt like it wasn't in the spirit of the original film. You know what I mean? Like it's not Judy Garland, but it wasn't supposed to be Judy Garland. They made a lot of changes to the books in order to produce the original movie. So this was Disney's attempt, and they failed inevitably. And Disney actually doesn't go back to create new Oz material until 2013 with the the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is a prequel to um, Oz the Great and Powerful, which is a prequel to the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Not the same prequel as Wicked, but is a prequel nonetheless. But this one didn't do well at the box office, but did well on home media. Like VCRs were just coming out at this time, and it did win an Oscar for best visual effects. So the visual effects, even though with the budget cuts and everything, the visual effects were state of the art at this time. And movies, fantasy movies, like I said, like Labyrinth, like um, Neverending Story, both the first one and the second one with Jonathan Brandis, the late Jonathan Brandis, they were all the rage at this time on videotape. They weren't doing good in the box office, but on videotape, they were, kids were eating this up. And Return to Oz was one of those that I enjoyed as a kid because I was one of those kids. I liked fantasy movies and I liked the original movie, The Wizard of Oz, but I always felt it was kind of lame. You know what I mean? So when I saw this, I'm like, okay, this is kind of much cooler, in my opinion. Like exploring electroshock therapy with kids, something that they really did at that time, is something. The foreclosure on Dorothy's family's house because of the tornado is something that they explore in the film. You know what I mean? So that was Disney's attempt at recreating the magic that was the Wizard of Oz. And ultimately, they didn't go back to it till much, much later. Oh, Stacy. The girl's name in Fairuza Balk's name in American History X was Stacy. I don't know where I got Stephanie from. Stacy. Uh, but those are the three roles that I remember her from: Return to Oz, Waterboy, and of course American History X. But anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The next one we'll be doing is Return to Oz 2013, starring James Franco. And then we'll talk about Disney's attempt. Disney finally does attempt to do a remake. Oh, Lisa wants to talk about the Wiz. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about the Wiz. Okay, that's the next. Forget about the James Franco one. We'll talk about the Wiz next. The Ashanti one is interesting. You know what I mean? So we're gonna have to backtrack to the 1970s, 1978, and we'll talk about The Wiz, which is also The Wiz also has its interesting backstories as well when it comes to this. But this was interesting, like with Walter Murch as a director, first time ever doing a kids film. He did Apocalypse Now. He did THX 1138. He did The Godfather 1 and 2. You know, like serious adult films. But he never really did a children's film before. They wanted George Lucas to work on this, which would have been interesting. George Lucas to work on Wizard of Oz, but he passed up on it, so they got him. So we'll talk about The Wiz. That'll be the next one, and then we'll talk about the Ashanti one, and then finally Oz the Great and Powerful. Uh, Different interpretations, and we talked about both Wicked movies. They're on the channel, so. Um, each and every Oz adaptation has its different stories, and like I said, The Wiz has its own machinations as being the first or one of the first. I don't know. I think either the first or one of the first, either before Lady Sings the Blues or after, but one of the early Motown movies, and it was after Lady Sings the Blues, but one of the Motown's ventures into movie making. So we'll be talking about that. Anyway, guys, peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, Lisa, for contributing. But yeah, this is one that I love. And this gets overlooked, this one here. You know what I mean? Like with the success of Wicked, with the success of the original Wizard of Oz, this one here, you know what I mean? It gets overlooked, you know, when it comes to um, Oz because the fans just don't like it. But it's funny that the fans don't like it because it's closer to the books. You know, I mean, I think the books got overlooked over time. The movie has overshadowed the 1939 movie has overshadowed the books. You know what I mean? And you know the political stances that L. Frank Baum tried to take, especially like, come on, the character of TikTok, the robot in this film, looks exactly like Teddy Roosevelt. So what does that tell you? And that comes from the TikTok of Oz, his 1916 book. You know what I mean? So uh, he was really trying to dig his feet into something deep, but it got overlooked because the other movie was so good that people think that's the Wizard of Oz, and that was the original intention of the Wizard of Oz. And it really wasn't. You know what I mean? So, peace, guys.